I know you're heading out on tour. You're going to be performing songs
Mm.
from Lamb Lies Down and other Genesis songs that you're a part
Yes,
of, and solo material. You've got a
sure.
live album coming out this
Yes,
July called The
that's
Lamb
right.
Stands Up,
Yes.
recorded at the Royal Albert Hall,
Yep.
performed last October to mark the 50th anniversary of Lamb. Um,
Indeed.
I believe that was all filmed, right? I
Yeah,
saw.
that's right. Yeah, it'll be a film. Absolutely. Yeah. So it'll be an album. It'll be a film. It'll be all of those things, all formats. Yeah, absolutely.
I saw the video for the performance of the title track, and I have to say, it's absolutely stunning. The vocalist Nad Silvin, is he still going to be touring with you?
Yeah, he's still going to be touring with me. Absolutely. Yes. I've been working with him for quite a few years. So he sings the Genesis stuff. We share out the other stuff amongst all the singers, including myself. But he's the Genesis guy. He does he does Peter Gabriel. He does Phil Collins.
Hmm.
He even does a mean Richie Havens. He's very good, and yeah, he performs it like he owns it. He was always a fan of that stuff. He was writing stuff that he said that he felt he was doing the kind of material that Genesis could have done, perhaps if they continued in a certain vein. But um, yeah, it's a great band. It's a rather extraordinary lineup. They're very capable, all of them.
Well, we're going to be very fortunate to have you come through Montreal with the band. That's going to be on October the 9th. And a few weeks before that, we get the long delayed 50th anniversary box set for Lamb that's going to be released. That's also going to feature a Dolby Atmos mix. I am so looking forward to that. So I'd like to take you back to January 1974. You guys have
Yeah,
just come off the road. You've
yeah,
been did a like a 4 month tour, and then 2 weeks later, you head
yeah.
out to the country to start to work on
Yeah.
the next album. You didn't even have time to water the plants and do your laundry. Why the quick turnaround?
I think we were a band that when we were young, we worked flat out. So I would say I was marginally busier at that time than I am now, but it's a close run thing. I've been doing this for 50 years plus. At that time, we didn't, there was no life outside of living out of a suitcase. That was it. We were a band determined to make it. Lots of gigs were being offered. Um, uh, I guess when you're off the road and you're able to do an album, um, it can be quite wonderful. It's a bit like the Immaculate Conception. If you're doing an album that's not being interrupted by any gigs whatsoever, then that's absolute bliss. It doesn't always work out like that. So I find so often then and so often now, one's in the middle of recording something and other things are going on. There are live gigs, but life continues. It's not only one thing.
And so you followed the philosophy, the band followed the philosophy of what was all the rage then, getting it together in the country. And
Yes,
you head out to Hampshire and
yes,
we've talked in the past about Headley Grange. Did you
yes.
guys know before you arrived there the dilapidated state of the place?
No, not really. People were cleaning up the place after Led Zeppelin had left there and left it kind of devastated. But I think it was already in pretty dire condition. So some of it was literally unsafe. At
Right.
one point, I was standing washing my hands in a bathroom, and I stepped back into the door jamb just as the floor gave away in the whole thing. Left the sink hanging on the wall. So we ended up taping up the door going, no passengers beyond this point. I mean, it was extraordinary, almost
Wow.
like the scene of a murder. Yeah, it could have taken my life. That would have been interesting. Luckily, fate took over, and I'm still here.
Um, so how did it work? I'm imagining that it began with the music because you had no concept at the beginning. So you guys just started to
Yes.
work on the
Yeah.
songs musically and then
Yeah.
sought a concept afterwards.
I think that's the way it worked. The concept was being devised as we were doing it in parallel. So Peter Gabriel said he wanted it to do all the lyrics, which became a whole story that accompanied the thing. So very often the band were working in one room and Peter was working in another on lyrics. And as this thing became a monster, there was so much for him to do. I mean, when you just read the sleeve notes, I mean, it's there's an awful lot of words there, an awful lot of lyrics, a lot going on. A very crowded album, a very an album that really I think depicted New York very, very well. The crowded aspect of it, you know, very, very busy keyboards, very busy vocals, not to mention the rest of what we were doing. So it's crammed full of detail. And I suspect, although I haven't heard it yet, but the Atmos mix, I suspect, will show some of the detail that's never been heard before. Now, there was a 5-1 mix. The original 5-1 was rejected. The second 5-1 mix was very good. I heard things in the guitar parts that I thought had been deleted and percussion parts. So there's much more going on than you heard on the original vinyl, which was heard on not a particularly great vinyl pressing at the time. So you were hearing distortion upon distortion in those days. Now there's a certain clarity brought to it. So I'm hoping to see Pete in a few days and find out what the state of play is as regards the Atmos thing, because I'd like to hear it before I rubber stamp it. But you know, it's one of those things. It's a great album. It sounds sweeter with the passing of time. It had its difficulties. As you say, we were getting it together in the country, as people did at that time. The only difference was that, you know, some of us were now fathers and expectant fathers, and the pressures were rather different from a band that was growing up. It's one thing when you're 19, 20, 21, then when there are wives and children involved, it's very different. It wasn't really a suitable place to bring kids, that's for sure. There were rats running around. The place was arguably haunted. I know Jimmy Page felt that it was haunted, and I did have the same room that he did shortly after that at the top of the house, and some of the noises at night were so loud you could barely sleep. But I have to assume that was rats within the walls scampering up and down. It was I have to tell you, it was an extraordinary experience.
I kind of wonder if that atmosphere, that somewhat eerie aspect of the place, whether
Yes,
that didn't bleed through into the music, because you know there's absolute melodic beauty on songs like Carpet Crawlers and The Lammy, etc. But there's
yeah,
also this kind of unsettling tension or foreboding in things like In the
yes,
Cage and The
yeah,
Chamber of 32 Doors. Uh,
yes.
was that more reflective of the tension that was starting to be created within the band, or was it something about the atmosphere of the place?
Well, you have to remember that Peter Gabriel had actually left the band before
Of
we
course,
started
yeah.
on this, and then rejoined a few days later. He was going to work with William Friedkin,
Right.
late of Exorcist fame, who wanted Pete to write a screenplay for him. And then when Friedkin realized that that was going to mean the breakup of the band as we knew it, he was reluctant to work with Pete at that point. So Pete rejoined, but over time, Pete made it known that it was going to be a short tenure. He was going to honor all the gigs that we were going to do, and then he was going to leave after that. And of course, I felt that not only was I losing a lead singer, but I was also losing a friend. I felt closest to Pete of all the guys in the band, and he's after all the guy who saw me at first, called me up, saw my ad, auditioned me, all of that. And so, you know, I had, you know, a big soft spot for him and great respect for everything he's done during the band and since as a humanitarian. You know, a great inventor,
Hmm.
a great poet, a great guy. Not the fastest, I have to say, which is why we watch with bated breath to see will it be delivered on time, which is I guess it has to be. But who holds the gun to whose head?
Hmm. I wonder if so when Peter was insistent that he wanted to write all the lyrics this time out,
Yes.
um, is that the point? Well, first of all, how did everybody else react to that at the time?
I think we were absolutely fine about it. The fact is that he wrote all the lyrics for Supper's Ready, which was on Foxtrot
Hmm.
from 1972. So it was no surprise to me that he said he wanted to do that. He didn't want to sing um, anyone else's lyrics, and I think that he wanted to modernize the band and perhaps urbanize it and modernize it certainly, and make something that was taking place in the mid 1970s, but in a way might augur in the new era, the 1980s. And I think he was headed towards the more or the less romantic stuff, um, the kind of industrial stuff, the stuff of the street, all of that. I think if we were recording it now, of course, there would have been lots of atmosphere that one would have liked to have included on it.
Hmm.
But you have to remember, that, this is a document in time, 50 years ago. Have things changed? Of course. Would you function differently? Of course. Have you gained experience? Yes. All of that. But I think it sounds sweeter with the passing of time. And you mentioned Chamber of 32 Doors. There's a tension within that because although Pete is ostensibly singing about the character Rail, I get the feeling that the words are extremely autobiographical. So
Right.
I think they parallel the stuff that he was coming up with when he was doing Salisbury Hill, a couple of years later, having left the band. So this idea of self-doubt, where do I go next? All of that implicit in the character Rail, but again, very personal to Pete. So I think that Pete was headed towards a solo career whilst he was in the band. The only problem is that Genesis was as near a democracy as you can get with any band, and everyone was writing. So um, impossible to keep everybody happy all of the time. Impossible.
It still amazes me that he anticipated with this character Rail and
Mm.
the story, The Lamb Lies Down
Yes.
on Broadway, pretty much the New York punk scene, which had not even started yet. I mean, it wouldn't get underway until
Yeah.
another year later, 1975. He had
Yeah.
the iconography, he had the
Yeah.
aesthetics of it, the
Yeah.
black leather jacket and the short
Yeah.
cropped hair and the spray
Sure.
can.
That's right. Yeah. Uh, all of that. And yes, auguring in the new, and particularly the punk era, the character described as punk, etc. But let's not forget the word punk goes right back to Shakespeare. Shakespeare uses the word punk to mean a rubbishy person. There we go. It's practically Chaucerian. It's so far back in the English language. But yeah, it was a very forward-looking album, um, but there are aspects of it. You mentioned the Lamia, I think, within it.
Mm.
A beautiful song that's the kind of pre-Raphaelite idea. Those romantic paintings that took place in the 19th century, where it was a celebration of womanhood to come. Women were painted much thinner than they were in actuality. And the idea, of course, with the Lamia, you've got the sexual connotation with it, the idea of women as predators, as vampires, snake-like figures. But it's a beautiful song, whilst you've got this sort of bittersweet thing going on. It's like, what are these women going to give me? What are they going to take away? It's the most surreal of lyrics, but nonetheless, a very beautiful song.
I think, if I remember correctly, I believe I read once that you named The Chamber of 32 Doors as being one of your favorite songs on the album.
Yeah, that's one of the ones I do live these days when I'm celebrating the land myself.
It
I do
kind of,
9 tunes from it, and it's one of the ones I chose. It stands alone, I think, quite apart from the concept.
to me, it kind of reminds me, bear with me here, but in a way, it has a day in the life kind of feel to it because you have this very whimsical McCartney-esque lightness to it, and then there's this very Lennon-esque vulnerability or sincerity to it, and it perfectly oscillates between these two
Yeah,
throughout the song.
I think it addresses two extremes very well. You have the country feel of the chorus, and the sparsity of that with the two-part harmony, but the early part is very much soul-searching and full of, as you say, foreboding. The idea of the tension of where do I go next, which is why it's the Chamber of 32 Doors. Um, it's almost a painting, isn't it,
Mhm.
in lyrical form. A certain amount of Lewis Carroll in there, a certain amount of Alice in Wonderland, part punk, part poet. Certainly cathartic for Pete, I think. Lots of soul searching going on. Shall I stay with the band? Shall I leave? All of that. I think it probably finds its parallel with some of the angst that Pink Floyd came up with The Wall. I think,
Mm.
whenever a band, an English band in particular, does a double concept album, um, we're either going to be talking about it 50 years later, or we're going to say, well, perhaps that one was a complete um, distraction from the truth.
Was there at any point discussions as to whether or not it should be condensed down to a single album, or was everybody on board with it being a double album right from the start?
No, it just grew and grew, and it became a double album. I think because we were left to our own devices in one room whilst Pete was in another. So naturally, the band overwrote. I won't say became overwrought, but we overwrote to to perhaps offer him alternatives. Say, well, you could do this, you could do that. Will this fit your lyric? We haven't heard it yet. We don't know the story yet. So you've got these two separate camps where things are growing and people are dreaming quite apart from each other. But I think it still stacks up. It's a great album. I do 9 tracks from it.
Hmm.
Incidentally, I didn't want to do the whole thing because doing it live, I wanted to make sure there was room for other things as well. One wants to address all of the other aspects, but the 9 tracks that I've chosen, I think, are probably ones that I think I was able to contribute the most to. Although there's lots of other things that I came up with, and I think, well, hey, they might not necessarily be the strongest. So I just want to do what I think is the strongest tunes from the whole thing, the things that are iconic, that'll work separately away from the story.
Well, one of the songs I know that you do is the sort of epic climax, the release from the tension that of the claustrophobic setting of the album, and that is the song "It," which
Yes.
I think, that song, this is 1974. If that had come out a decade later,
Yeah.
1984, it would
Yeah.
have sat perfectly alongside Depeche Mode or Tears for Fears. It has
Yeah.
that same sort of anthemic pop feel to it.
Uh, Anthemic pop, certainly, yes. I think the mix on the original could perhaps have been better, to get the separation and the vocal sound. I don't mean the vocal performance, but the vocal sound. And of course, since then, Pete's voice deepened. So I think the difference between being a boy and being able to take on Ray Charles, that
Mm.
happens to singers. The voice suddenly drops, and you're another character. Uh, but Pete developed as a singer marvelously. Even from that first solo album, there was a difference with the stuff that he was doing. Suddenly, the voice was given priority. There was production that really suited it. And then, of course, years later, he's working with George Martin and Larry Adler, a version of Summertime, where really sounds like the definitive version of that. So I'm a huge fan of Pete's, both when he was in the band and the things that he did subsequently.
I think his voice is absolutely gorgeous on that album. I also think Phil's drumming was never better
Yeah.
than it is on the record. I mean, I was listening to it last night again, and I keep marveling, not just Phil's drumming, but the entire band. Perhaps it's a product of you guys having been out on the road so much. You are so tight on that album. It is so cohesive.
Yeah, we were probably gaining in precision despite ourselves. Um, at times, it was very difficult for me. I had to decide whether I was going to interrupt a virtuosic keyboard performance that already
Mm.
had a vocal on top of it, or I could double the bass line, I could do something else, but I had to try and find something that was complementary, and that can be very, very difficult. It's somewhat easier to play heroic guitar. Yep, give him a solo and off he goes.
Right.
Most guitarists worth their salt can just fill the allotted space. But I have to tell you, it's much more difficult when you're trying to colorize something that's already very densely packed. So I would do things that were shimmering away in a separate corner. I had to find things that the guitar could do where it wasn't a keyboard, it wasn't a synth, but somehow it managed to find its place within this you know dense tableau. Really,
It's only rock and roll, but I like it.
there you go. It's only rock and roll, and sometimes I like things that aren't rock and roll. It's not rock and roll, but I like it too, and
Mhm.
it's only knock and null, but I like it. So there was the consciously referential thing that Pete was going through. And I know people use that term these days, but you could see it with needles and pins
Right.
um, being celebrated. So the whole of I was going to say the American songbook, but of course the Stones came up with rock and roll. So you've got all of that. The idea that that's being referenced to the idea of it being an inclusive album in that way.
Now I know Selling England by the Pound is your personal favorite, but how does Lamb rank with you when you look back upon it now? And of course, you are performing the songs. Uh,
Yes.
do you look back with it with a degree of fondness or frustration that it could have been different?
Uh, um, well, I think that when you're doing something live, um, I personally feel the need if I'm doing a live version of a favorite tune of the audience, I want it to be an authentic version, but I also want to have room to be able to move within it. If I do something like "Fly on a Windshield," I won't play the same phrases because it was improvised in the first place. There are a couple of fixed melodies on it, but then after that, and of course, before you have the major key change in it that goes up from E to F sharp. And I wrote something to make that make sense. But the rest of it is improvised. So I do it now. And so when I'm performing that, I think, well, here's a missed opportunity. These days, I can make my guitar sound like a New York police car siren
Hmm.
with use of the Fernandez guitar with the sustainer pickup set on, the high harmonic feeding back and using a Floyd Rose tremolo arm and do police car noises on it. So I want to give it the New York that it lacked at the time. So, to try and make it more authentic. And when when we do it live, before we start performing this, we have literally sounds of New York street noises before we come in with the iconic keyboard stuff, the cross finger stuff, you know, all that busy stuff. I like doing that very much. Um, it's an extraordinary piece of work, the whole thing. Um, it would probably stand being made into a movie. People have talked about it an
Yeah.
awful lot. um, I suspect that one day someone, if not myself, will probably transfer those keyboard parts to orchestra and have Fast and Furious strings doing it in a kind of maybe a sort of Vincent Mendoza kind of way, the stuff that he did with Joni Mitchell. Beautiful orchestral arrangements of well-known songs.
Right.
If you can get that, then the music can transcend its pop and rock limitations and become part of something else, join a whole other kind of songbook. Because I know that schools study this stuff, and I've seen them do it. I've seen 30 percussionists doing versions of things that we did with Genesis, and you think, my God, this is stuff that we didn't even write down ourselves. We just wrote down the changes. Okay, that's an F sharp over E, for instance. But yeah, they're dealing with the score sheet. So if it's already done that, who knows where it goes next? So there's always a possibility at some point. I know Pete was very keen on it becoming a musical. And every now and again, someone would say, "Oh, yes, I'd like to make a film of it." Blah, 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 blah. So, watch this space. I wonder how it'll all, when the dust settles.
Well, we look forward to seeing you perform some of the songs
Sure.
coming up in October. You realize you are the only one really keeping the flame alive, other than a tribute band like the Musical Box, for instance.
Yeah.
So, may you carry the flame high for many more years
Oh,
to
thank you
come.
very much. Yeah, I really enjoy honoring the early work and later work, of course. Still making a noise for a living. Love doing it. Looking forward to coming to Canada.
One last question before I let you go, because even though this happened like 4 years ago, I haven't
Yeah.
had a chance to ask you about it. What did you think of the Get Back documentary series? Because I know you're a
Oh,
big
you mean
Beatles fan.
the do we are we talking about the Beatles stuff?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I saw the whole thing in not in one go because it took several sittings. Um, it was very interesting. It made me wonder how the hell they managed to write the stuff that was so cohesive. I think trying to write under the glare of the camera, even for master songwriters as they were, um, created certain pressures that I think they would have been happy to have been without. I mean, every time you play a bum note, it's going to be, yep, everyone's going to see this, excuse me. So I don't know if it was wise. Um, and of course, you are watching the breakup of a band. You see
Yeah.
McCartney on one hand trying to hold it all together, and the others sitting there almost like pupils facing him. And you think that couldn't have always been the dynamic with that band. So,
Mhm.
and Lennon is plainly pulling away, and George actually leaves at one
Yeah,
point.
it kind of
Yeah, yeah,
reminded me
yeah.
when Peter left for a little while.
Went home, had tea, left Beatles.
Yeah.
Almost like oh yeah,
See you
had
around the clubs,
sausages,
lads.
decide switch to cornflakes. Yeah, it's extraordinary. And then being convinced to come back, but we didn't. We'll never know. That fly on the wall documentary has to remain in the imagination. What convinced him to come back? Because
Yeah.
George became a brilliant songwriter in his own right, and we'll never know what he contributed to those early things that just there were some stunning guitar parts. Who came up with that stuff? We don't know. I mean, I know there are yards and yards of stuff about this. Okay, McCartney did the solo on what was it,
Axeman.
Taxman,
Yeah.
Taxman, and then it's used for Tomorrow Never Knows in reverse, which nobody spotted until they were told.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, well, a brilliant band, um, but I think shared writing is a very difficult thing. The shared pen, even amongst geniuses, I think it's always going to be a stretch. There's always going to be a tension there, especially if people become competitive with each other. As long as they're cooperating, you can get wonderful things out of that. But people have their own agendas. Mention no names.